Well, she drove away. They drove away. That's still beautiful paper. So I'm sure they have. He says, yeah, we need more.
All right, good morning. So I'm just checking a couple sources to make sure we're live, because I was getting a weird error message I've never seen before. Are we live on YouTube? Will you mind jumping on and looking? And let's check over here. All right, just wait for a confirmation that we're...
Nothing yet. Nothing. Not yet.
Nothing yet. Well, yeah, everyone should grab notes. All right, so it appears to me, maybe I'm mistaken, but YouTube is not cooperating. Looks like we're live on the church website, and it looks like we're live on Facebook, but for some reason not on YouTube. Is that? That's what you're getting? Okay. So if you are tuning in and you're on YouTube or the church's website, you should be good to go. If not, YouTube is giving me trouble. YouTube's been doing weird stuff last couple weeks when we try to live stream with this system in here. And apparently it's the same thing this morning. So if you're watching this right now, you can pick it up on YouTube. You can pick it up on the church's website, gracelifebiblechurch.com. If you go to live stream, if you go to gracelifebiblechurch.com live stream, you should be able to see us right here, I believe. And there we are. So we're working two spots, but not everywhere. Not sure what's going on with that. So you guys should have in front of you a set of notes for lesson 236, Assessing the Printed History of the King James Text, 1629 Cambridge Edition, Part 3. Okay? If you are joining us online and you want to follow along with the notes, you could go to gracelifebiblechurch.com, scroll down under Recent Sermons here for May 26. You can click on that link right there, and we should be up and going. Still nothing there, Eli?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I just want to say before we get started here a couple things. So this is going to be the last lesson on the 1629 Cambridge edition. So whatever we get through, we get through. Whatever we don't, I'm just going to commend to you in the notes to check out on your own time. All right? So we're in a weird spot right now where I don't really want to cross a threshold into talking about the 1638 Cambridge, because once I do that, then I'm opening the floodgates to have to finish that before we move on. So what I'm thinking is that this is probably going to be the last class in this topic for the summer, all right? We will still have class every week, and we'll be throwing it open to others to take up some time slots. So, Bud, I'm glad you're sitting there. You can consider possibly couple options as far as teaching goes, maybe for this summer. I'd appreciate it if you did. I'm assuming you always seem to have some stuff you want to talk about.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you.
So we should chat about that later today. All right, introduction. Let's get right into this. Lesson 236, Assessing the Printed History of the King James Text, 1629 Cambridge Edition, Part 3. Let's get into the introduction. In lesson 235, which would have been the previous lesson, we continued our look at the 1629 Cambridge edition. We did so by resuming our survey of Professor David Norton's book, A Textual History of the King James Bible. Moreover, we reviewed statements from Dr. David Reagan's piece, The King James Version of 1611, The Myth of Early Revisions, regarding the printed history of the King James text. According to Reagan, quote, all of these details, and what he's referring to there in bracket is 4 categories identified by Reagan: changes in typeface, letter formation, spelling/punctuation, and correction of printer errors, established the fact that there were no true revisions in the sense of updating the language or correcting translation errors. And that's from Reagan, page 7. While we agreed with Reagan that the King James translators made no, quote, translation errors or mistakes in terms of misrepresenting the text in English, we question the veracity of Reagan's statement that there were, quote, no true revisions in the sense of the updating of language. So let me just be clear. You can translate any passage half a dozen ways and still be correct. I don't think the King James translators made any mistakes in the sense that they misstated anything in English that the text said in Hebrew or Greek, okay? But Reagan is saying that there were no true revisions in the sense of the updating of any language. I tried to demonstrate to you last Sunday by looking at examples from the 1629 Cambridge that I'm not sure that that's a true statement. In fact, I don't think it is a true statement, all right? We judge the accuracy of Reagan's statements against the definitions of the following concepts: printer's errors, compositors, and author's alterations, along with 3 textual examples raised by Professor Norton in the discussion of the 1629 Cambridge. These examples included, last week we looked at Job 4:6. That was our main example. Psalm 113 verse 9 and Isaiah 6:8. In doing so, we concluded that Reagan's statement is not true. I don't think it's a true statement that there were no true revisions in the sense of the updating of language. Okay, I think we demonstrated that last Sunday. And anybody that has looked at the notes from last Sunday with an open mind has agreed that you cannot rightly call what was happening in Job 4:6 a printer's error. Okay? There were editorial things being done to that verse by later editors of the text. All right? So this was observed clearly in the example of Job 4:6. And again, you should see the notes from lesson 235 for those details. So what I want to do now is continue our discussion of the 1629 Cambridge. All right? Professor Norton comments on the thorny subject of the interchange between the translators and their later editions when he states the following, quote, typically the textual changes deal with perceived inaccuracies in the work of the translators rather than printers' errors. So it is Norton's opinion that the majority of what is going on here is not the fixing of printers' errors. Okay? They inaugurate the principal effect made by the successive editors through into this century, the effect to refine the King James Bible as a translation. Usually this refinement is a matter of making the King James Bible a still more literal representation of the originals. So let's just stop there. What he's saying is that as editors evaluated this, they were trying to bring it into even more of a literal representation of the Greek and Hebrew than it already was. Now, we can debate whether this is good or bad, right or wrong. The fact is, it happened, and that's where I'm after. In fact, I would say to you that as soon as you start to get into the business of trying to ascribe intent, that's a nasty business to get into because you don't always know the intent, right? What you can interpret or look at is the facts that certain things got changed, and you can surmise why that may or may not be the case, but you're never going to always be able to determine intent unless you see a clear printer's error. Okay, let's move on. Let's see here. The editors test the text against the original languages and make changes when they judge that the translators were loose in their treatment of the originals. So in other words, later editors, according to Norton, what they're doing is they're taking the King James text and they're comparing it with Greek and Hebrew, and in places where they felt where the translators weren't literal enough, they make adjustments, and the adjustments they make are towards a more literal representation of the text. That's what he's saying. Okay? In doing this, they treat the translator's work as improvable, to take license to know better than them how their work should read. You see, that's a thorny subject, right? Because do later editors really have the authority to change what the King James translators, the choices that they made? All right. So you can see how this becomes a hot potato issue for people that are King James advocates. Now, the translators might have agreed that their work was not perfect, and they might have also assented to some, even many, of the changes, but there is evidence that they rejected some of the readings that their editors decided were better. So let's stop right there. Does anybody have any questions? So one of my points in all of this has been the following. Okay? The tendency within pro-King James advocacy has been to say these are all printer errors, because that's an argument of convenience to say that. What I'm saying is, no, later editors did make changes to the text. That seems to me to be a completely true statement, okay? Where we get into trouble is when we try to start ascribing meaning. So what we're going to be doing is just looking at examples of occurrences here so that you guys can see what's going on. As stated in the previous lesson, we do not always agree with Professor Norton's conclusions, especially when they are not supported with objective textual evidence. Norton suggests that the overriding principle of the 1629 Cambridge editors was to increase the literal nature of the English renderings found in the AV, or found in the King James Bible. So what he's saying is, as they do this work, they're comparing the work against the original, and that the majority of the adjustments that they're making are to render the King James text more literal in some cases than what the translators, than the text originally represented by the translators. Norton spends much time discussing the relationship between the primary source work-in-progress documents. In doing so, he speculates as follows, quote, rather than merely illustrating some typical changes, it will be more useful to take the examples that bear on the question of whether the translators would have approved of all of them. Here, the annotations of Bod 1602 are crucial because they coincide with the first edition readings. They increase the probability that those readings are the intended result of close consideration. Inferences from annotations that do not correspond to the first edition are less certain. So let's stop. Understand what he's saying. He's saying when you can take a 1611 and you can compare it against Bod 1602 and the annotations made by the translators in that document, you have a more sure guide to say that something they did was intentional because it checks out against another primary work in progress document. Does that make sense? In cases where that is not the case, that's the last sentence, in inferences where annotations inferences from annotations that do not correspond to the first edition are less certain. Further thought may have taken place or an error of transmission may have been made. Similarly, inferences from coincidences with the 1602 text are ambiguous. Where these occur in the first edition and come from parts of Bod 1602 that were annotated, they probably indicate the translators considered approval but may represent an oversight. And where the 1629 edition agrees with the 1602 against the first edition, that would be the 1611, it is likely but not certain that the translators rejected that reading. Now, I want you to see, is Norton making what he feels to be educated guesses based upon documentary evidence? Can he know for sure that any of these are true?
No.
No, he cannot. But what you cannot deny is, are these types of changes being made? That is an undeniable fact, okay? So, some King James supporters refuse to consider Norton's work because of the speculative nature of some of his conclusions. Contrary to popular opinion, I do not agree with every jot and tittle of Norton's work. Some of Professor Norton's speculations make sense considering the historical evidence, others do not. Responsible readers should consider Norton's remarks on a case-by-case basis. What follows is the remainder of Norton's comments on the 1629 Cambridge edition, along with photographic evidence to illuminate his points. So we're going to take a chunk of Norton's text, read it, understand what he's saying, and then show you the photographic evidence from the documents about each one of these examples. Okay? So, 14 of the 30 literal changes that the 1629 made to number come in parts of the Old Testament that are annotated in Bod 1602. 5 of these 14 have annotations that create the first edition reading and so confirm that the translators decided against the more literal reading that the 1629 editors judged correct. So understand, in these examples, 5 of these 14 have annotations that create the first edition reading and so confirm the translators decided against the more literal reading. What he's saying there is, in these 5, there's a unity between the 1602 annotations and the 1611, which suggests that these were intentional choices made by who? The translators, okay? 3 examples will be useful not just for indicating the nature of the 1612 work, but also for the kind of problem there may be with it. The other 2 examples are Leviticus 10:14 and 2 Kings 18:18. At Song of Solomon 4:6, the translator struck through the 1602's the mountain of myrrh and substituted the mountains plural of what? Myrrh. One might wonder why they worked in this way when a simple insertion of S would have sufficed. So let's stop there and let's look at the picture. Okay? What he's talking about is this. Notice, do they strike out this entire line? Okay, and then they rewrite it over here. And what he's saying is all they would have had to do is just insert an S where? At the end of mountains, if that's what they wanted to do. So they go the long way around making this change, right? Because they strike this out and then they restate it marginally with the plural S, okay? Everybody understand what he just said? Perhaps they contemplated a more substantial change and then decided against it. So in other words, what he's saying is when they strike this whole thing out, maybe they're contemplating changing more things, but then they decide the only thing they want to change is to make mountains what? Plural. Okay? Intending to reinstate the 1600 reading, accidentally changed it. So he suggests maybe they accidentally put what? When they rewrote it in the margin, they maybe accidentally add an S to what word? Mountains. Okay? Can you know for sure?
No.
No. You cannot know for sure. But can you know for sure that they did stuff to this verse? Okay? This is possible, but there are other instances of annotations taking a long way to make a small change. And it is rare for a reading to be deleted and then the same reading written in. Yet mountains does look like an error. This is what he's saying. The Hebrew is singular as it is in the Greek of the Septuagint. The Latin of the Vulgate and the English of the Geneva and bishops, moreover, the parallelism works better with a singular, for a singular hill follows, also singular in Hebrew. Consequently, the first editions, I will get me to the mountains plural of myrrh and to the hill singular of frankincense, seems wrong on 2 counts, and the 1629 restoration of the 1602 reading absolutely right. This is what Norton is saying. So let's make sure we understand exactly what's going on, okay? Let's look at the pictures. So here's the first one from the 1560 Geneva, okay? I will go into the mountain what? Singular of myrrh and to the mountain of what? Incense. So mountain is singular, mountain is what? Singular in the 1560 Geneva. Okay? Now we have the annotations recorded in Bod's 1602. I've already said they've crossed out this entire line and they've rewritten it. Okay? Let's go down to, and when they rewrite it, I will get me to the mountains, plural of what? Myrrh. Okay? So then we can look at the verse in the 1611. Here's the verse in the 1611. I will get me to the mountains, plural of what? Myrrh, and to the hill, singular of what? Frankincense. Okay? So the suggestion here is that the annotations made to Bod, are they accepted into the 1611? Remember they said mountains, and now they say what? Mountains. Is everybody with that? Okay?
Why did they change it was mountains of incense to hill of frankincense?
That style poetic, the way the Hebrews write, they repeat.
That's called a parallelism in Hebrew. But what Amy's saying is, I think, why do they change mountain of... I think what I'm hearing you say, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're observing that it said mountain twice.
Yeah.
Right? And then here, that they switch to mountain and hill.
Yes.
That's what I'm...
And then incense to frankincense.
So, incense, frankincense is incense. So I don't see an issue with that. Let me just see one thing here. And mountain and hill is I think what it does is it reinforces the parallelism in the Hebrew. And it makes for a more stylistic English sentence by not repeating mountains twice. Okay? I mean, even today in your grammar class, when you take English, they'll tell you try not to use the same word twice in the same sentence. Try to use a synonym, right? But now watch what happens with the 1629 Cambridge. Okay? So they go, I will get me to the what? Mountain singular of myrrh, and to the hill singular of what? So does the 1629 editors move the text from mountains plural back to mountains singular? Now look in your Bible. Go find Song of Solomon chapter 4. Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 6. Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 6. We never did come on YouTube, did we?
I don't think so.
Okay. Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 6. Notice, so you are reading a 1769 edition, right? Notice chapter 4, Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 6. Until the day break and the shadows flee away. Now watch. And I will get me to the mountain what? Singular. To the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. Okay? So the edit that is made by the 1629 Cambridge editors, does that become the standard reading for that verse? Okay? When you compare that against what the 1611 had and against what Boz 1602 seems to suggest, the Cambridge editors of 1629, have they made a change to reinstate mountain as what? Singular. As opposed to what? Plural. Okay, so let's look at the analysis there. Before we read this, anybody have any questions or comments?
They made a minor change in spelling of mountain too. They left the E off. Just a minor.
So how do you view this one, Mike? Do you view this as was it a printer error in the 1611? That they accidentally put an S on the end? Or was it the intentional decision of the King James translators to put the S on the end? Was there a mistake made when they struck through the line and rewrote the line in the margin of Bod 1602 by accidentally putting an S on the end? You see what I'm saying? Like, here's the problem. You don't know.
Right, you just don't know.
You don't, just one sec, bud. Yeah. You don't know. But what you can't do is you can't say it didn't happen. I mean, you can stick your head in the sand if you want and pretend it didn't happen, but it happened, right? Now, anything we're going to say about why it happened is going to admittedly involve a certain amount of speculation. But you can't say and pretend like it didn't happen. Yeah.
Had a thought to compare with mountains of Ararat and see if it's plural or singular, and that might help you decide what they were thinking.
So you're saying go to a parallel passage and
Yeah.
compare?
Does it say mountain of Ararat?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that example, so I can't speak to it with any understanding. But yeah, so let's look at the analysis underneath this picture, okay? The 1629's reading, I will get thee to the mountain singular of myrrh, is interesting to compare with the plural reading of mountains of myrrh found in the 1611. Now first, the Hebrew is singular, not plural. I looked it up. It is singular in Hebrew. It is referring to a mountain, not mountains. Okay? Second, the singular mountain of myrrh was the established English reading in the Coverdale, Matthews, Great, Geneva, and Bishop's Bibles, all of which were consulted by the King James translators according to Rule 14. Lastly, the singular reading, mountain of myrrh, strengthens the parallelism with the singular form of in the next clause and the hill of frankincense. Given the fact that there is a difference of one English character between mountain and mountains, it seems reasonable to conclude that mountains was a printer's error in the 1611. At the same time, the annotations recorded in Bod's 1602 suggest that the plural reading was preferred by the King James translators. So what are we left to conclude? I think the best we're left to conclude is to acknowledge that anything we're going to say is speculation. But do issues like this exist in the printed history of the text? Okay. Any questions before we move on to the next one? All right. Professor Norton tackles another example. And let me back up though before I get into this. Do you see what Norton is suggesting though is when the 1629 Cambridge editors were looking at this verse, that the reason they switched it to mountain is because they went and looked at the Hebrew. And they saw the Hebrew was what? Singular. And so they switched it from mountains plural to mountain what? Singular. And in doing so, did they thereby make that reading more literal to the Hebrew by saying mountain singular as opposed to mountains plural?
Yes.
So what Norton is saying is that in some of these examples, they suggest, and I'm going to say it that way, they suggest that there's a literal conformity to the Hebrew or Greek going on in some of these changes that are being made. All right. Now, Professor Norton tackles another example in 1 Samuel 28:7. At 1 Samuel 28:7, where 1602 reads, "His servants said," the translators deleted the S, and his servant said. So this is the same kind of phenomenon, right? Where they take it's the difference between a singular and a what? And a plural, right? By contrast with the previous example, there is no question but that this is a rejection of the literal sense. And there's the Hebrew word. The reason seems straightforward. Whereas Saul spoke to his servants collectively, the translators judged that they did not reply in chorus, but that the natural understanding of the action is that one servant replied, "Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath the familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him." Okay? So there's the difference, right? So are all of the servants answering in chorus and in unison, or is one servant aware of where the witch of Endor is, and so he answers singularly, "Hey, Saul, you want to see the witch? She's down there around the corner. You'll find her next to 7-Eleven." Okay? So the 1629 editors restored the 1602 reading, correcting the translators, but going against their favored reading. Okay? That's his opinion. Now let's look at this. So here's Bod 1602. Okay? Notice there are some changes here. "Then Saul said unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath the familiar spirit, that I may go to her," and here's what the 1602 originally had, "and ask of her." They strike through ask and they write inquire. interlineary, okay? And his servants. So the text had an S, and what did they do?
Crossed it out.
They crossed it out, right? Said unto him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. Okay? Let's go to the next picture. So here's 1 Samuel 28:7. Okay? So we're looking for some changes, right? So notice, that I may go to her and inquire. So do they accept the revision here, recorded, of ask to inquire? Okay? And then notice also that this second servant, also his servant said unto him. So do they accept the revision of striking the S from servants?
Yes.
And make it singular?
Yep.
Okay, so let's just stop there for a minute. Does everybody understand the difference? In this verse, then said Saul unto his servants what? That'd be who? All of them. Okay? Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. Now watch. And his servant said to him. So this reading in the 1611 suggests that of all of the plural servants, one servant, what? Replies. If you make this servants here, that would mean that all of the servants are what? Replying. You see the difference?
Or at least more than one.
Or at least more than one. Maybe not every one of them, but at least more than one. All right, where am I at here? Any questions so far?
If you go back to the previous page, Norton says the 1629 editors restored the 1602 reading. But you can see that in the 1602 they crossed off the S in servants, and in the 1629 servants has an S. So I don't get his point there. He says editors restored the 1602.
Okay, so I think what's confusing you, Mike, is this. So, this is a 1602,
Right.
okay, where they're recording this change.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you had a 1602 that didn't have their that didn't have their alterations or revisions, you wouldn't have this S struck through. So what he's saying is that, what Norton is saying is that the 1629 Cambridge reinstated the unedited 1602 reading.
The unedited.
The unedited 1602 reading. So maybe we need to add that word in there, I don't know. Does that make more sense now?
It's a quote though from Norton.
So, but I agree, it's a little bit of a sloppy quote.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is, they did not reinstate all of it. If all you're talking about is the S at the end of servants, yeah. But they still kept what? They still keep inquire, don't they?
Yeah.
And inquire was another change that was made to the 1602.
They kept inquiring.
So, yeah. So let's look at the next picture. We've kind of already touched on it, but we should just formally do it, okay? So here's the 1629 Cambridge, okay? And so they keep inquire. And his what? So do they reinstate the S to make servants plural here?
Yep.
Okay? Boz 1602 struck through the S. The 1611 adopted the reading with no S, servant singular. The 1629 Cambridge translator, or editors, excuse me, put it back in. So go in your Bible, go to 1 Samuel 28:7. First Samuel 28, verse 7. Then said Saul unto his servants, plural, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. So there's the inquire change. And his servants said to him. So the alteration, the revision made by the 1629 Cambridge editor, did it become the standard reading? Shake your head yes, because that's what happened, okay? Next point. As with the last example, all of the pre-1611 English Bibles follow the Hebrew and are plural in the reading servants. So I checked this out too. If you look up this in interlinear, it'll show you very clearly that the Hebrew word that's translated servants is plural, not what? Singular, okay? Therefore, the 1611 reading stands alone in its singular reading of servant. Again, the difference between servant and servants is one English character strongly pointing in the direction of a printer's error. On the other hand, the annotations in BOD 1602 point in the direction of an intentional change on the part of the translators. So again, can we know for sure? No. Anything I say, anything Norton says, is there an element of speculation here?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. But again, you can't say, do we know for sure that's a printer's error, or is there evidence to suggest it was intentional for them to say servant in 1611? Well, there's a Bible that they used and they crossed out the letter S.
We weren't there.
We weren't there. All right? So Norton finishes a third example in this category with 2 Kings 21:21. At 2 Kings 21:21, the translators inserted an S after way, making the 1602's literal walked in the way into more natural English, and he walked in all the ways of his father that his father walked in. 1602 agreed with 1629, agreed with 1602, but a problem arises. To walk in the way or ways of is a common Old Testament idiom. The Hebrew uses both singular and plural, but the translators sometimes, as here, give a plural for a Hebrew singular. It would be possible throughout to conform the English exactly to the Hebrew, as the 1629 editors did here. But they left some instances untouched, with the result that the text remains inconsistent, though not quite as inconsistent as the translators left it. Okay? So let's look at the examples. Page 6. So here we go. 2 Kings 21:21. This is BOD 1602. Okay? And we have the insertion of he. And he walked in all the ways. So you see the insertion here of the S up here on ways. Okay? So that is the way the translators edited that verse to read. Look at the 1611, and you'll notice, do they accept the insertion of he?
Yes.
And does it read ways, plural, with the S on the end? Yes. Okay? Then we could go to the Cambridge 1629 Cambridge. Do they retain he?
Yes.
Okay? And what change do they make? They move ways back to singular what? Way. All right? I don't have any, so let's just look at it. Go to 2 Kings in your Bible, 2 Kings 21. First 2 Chronicles, First 2 Kings. Come on. I keep turning too far every time I... Second Kings 21:21. Notice. And he walked in all the what? Way that his father walked in. So did the edit made by the 1629 Cambridge editors become the standard reading? Yep. All right, any questions before we move on? Mike, did you have something?
It's just way and ways, it's different ways of saying the same thing.
I agree. Thus, what we argued in our book.
And the King James editors intentionally varied their rendering of the English, as they said in the preface, to make it sound more.
So this is why I don't approve of all of the edits that Norton makes in his new Cambridge Paragraph Model. But you can see real clear, is he able to spot variant readings in the printed history of the King James text? Okay? So, Norton concludes his discussion of these examples by stating the following. So that would be the ones that we just looked at, okay? If it is easy to agree with the 1629's restoration of mountain and easy to sympathize with the restoration of servant, it is difficult to agree with the restoration of way. This is the nub of the problem. Though one may agree with some of the changes made by later editors in the quest for greater accuracy, skipping the parentheses, others, for various reasons, are more dubious, and this calls into question every instance where a deliberate decision of the translators is rejected. And once printers' errors are set aside, there is little in the first edition of which we can say with certainty that it does not represent a deliberate decision. The three examples just discussed stand as typical of the work of the 1629 editors. The reader who wishes to go further should browse in Appendix 8, perhaps beginning with the three instances where the editors restored a possessive pronoun that the translators replaced with a definite article, as they annotated Bod 1602, Deuteronomy 15:11, Joel 3:13, and Nahum 3:7. Well, in this wonderful age of technology that we have, we can actually look at all three of these examples. Okay, so let's look at Deuteronomy 15:11 first. And here's Bod 1602. All right, notice, starting here with needy, they strike and pour in the land. They strike and the pour in, notice, thy land, and they change it to in the what?
Land.
The land. Thy would be possessive, the would be definite. Does everybody understand that? So then look at the 1611. They accept needy in the land. All right? Deuteronomy 15:11. Deuteronomy 15:11. So now we have the Cambridge 1629. Notice, to thy poor and to thy needy in thy what? So do they switch it back to a possessive from a definite? So are they reinstating the 1602 reading in the Cambridge edition of 1629? So go in your Bible, go to Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy 15, verse 11. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy in thy what?
Land.
So did the 1629 Cambridge edition become the standard reading at that verse? So look, guys, here's one of my big points, okay? And this is it. Let's talk about this from the standpoint of a printer error. Is there one character difference between the and thy? But for there to be a printer error, does there have to be something that stands out in the text that would make it obvious that the compositor has made a mistake? Okay? So when the 1611 said the land, does that match what it already said above about the land? So would there be anything here that would scream printer error? I'm saying the answer to that would be what?
No.
No. Okay? So when you look at a 1629 Cambridge and you see them going back in reach and changing the to thy, and then thy becomes the standard reading that you still have in front of you today in 2024, I don't see how you get around this fact. Do later editors impact the text? Yeah. Thy land, the land, it's still Israel's who? It's still Israel's land. Okay? Let's look at Job 3, verse 13. Okay? Here's bod. There's a lot going on here, so let's just jump down here, okay? Notice that they originally had it there, and they edit and they strike through this and they make it the wickedness is multiplied great, and they take out the word multiplied. So we're talking about this clause at the end of the verse, okay? So you see, for their wickedness is multiplied. Multiplied is taken out, great is inserted. So everybody see that? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay. 16:11. Notice that they accept those revisions. For the wickedness is great. So does this reflect changing there to the and changing multiplied to great? Okay? And then we could look at 1629 Cambridge. Look at the last clause, okay? For their wickedness is what?
Great.
So did they reinstate the their reading?
There's a big difference between the and there.
I don't know that I would agree with that in the context of the verse, because it's still obvious who he's talking about being wicked. Okay? But let's go look at Joel 3. Joel chapter 3, verse 13. End of that verse, notice for their wickedness is what?
Great.
So does the edit made by the 1629 Cambridge become the standard reading? Okay?
Yeah.
Nahum 3:7. There's a lot going on this one too. This clause up here is what we're talking about, okay? Thy princes are as grasshoppers is totally removed, right? Look at the 1611. Well, let me back. There's another one there. So do they remove a lot of stuff here in the original verse? And they rewrite things over here. Okay? And notice that thy becomes what? The crowned are as locusts, right? So there's a lot of differences going on in this one. But look at Cambridge. What do they switch this back to? They switch the back to what? Thy. Okay. So that brings us to page 9. Go to page 9. So in the course of this browsing, occasional examples will be found that appear to run counter to the picture I've just given. So he's acknowledging the fact that that some of these are going to be somewhat counterintuitive, right? Sometimes, example, Leviticus 3:11, 1 Kings 15:19, and Jeremiah 4:6, the 1629 editors change the text to readings found in the bod annotations, and sometimes perhaps showing the human inconsistency that is almost impossible to escape, that make the translation less literal. So there's examples of them making it more literal and examples of them making it what? Less literal. Okay, Leviticus 11. Let's look at Leviticus 11. Okay, so we're talking about this phrase here in the middle of the verse, okay? And chaff the cud among the beasts. So notice, do they insert the word the into this? Right here. All right? 16:11. It accepts this, right? And cheweth cud. So do they reject the inclusion of cud in the 1611? So here it is, remember? They insert the, okay? Here it's missing. So it's not in the 1611, and the and became an ampersand, which I think is just a space saver, but
The spelling of cheweth was chod.
so they changed choth to cheweth too.
Yeah.
So here's Cambridge now. Okay? Notice they reinsert the word and, they get rid of the ampersand. And cheweth, and what do they put back in? The. And cheweth the cud. So you have examples. So in other words, by adding the definite article, now they're not acting in accordance with the principle of literalism. Now they're seeming to do what? The opposite. Okay. 2 Kings 15:19. Okay. We're talking about this part of the verse. Come and break thy bond is what it originally had, and they change it to league. Then they take out that thou hast with Baasha, right? King of Israel. And notice, do they insert a letter here? An H?
Right.
Okay? They insert the H there for that. And then if we go to the, Mike, in the notes, we need a 1 before 1 Kings at the top of the page. Then we come to 1611. Notice what it says. Come and break the league with Baasha. So do they accept the altered spelling of Baasha? Yep, but then all of a sudden we have the instead of what? Thy. Is everybody with that?
Yeah.
Then we look at the 1629 Cambridge. And that corresponding phrase, come and break thy league. So again, now we have the league being changed back to what? Thy league with Baasha. So these are examples in the other direction where the changes that are being made are less literal. Okay, now, we're running out of time. So if you look at the bottom of page 10, you've got a couple more here. Jeremiah 4:6. Okay, and the difference here is set up the standard or set up the standards. Plural. You got at the bottom of page 10, you've got Jeremiah 4:6, and then about halfway down page 11, you've got Genesis 3:9. We should maybe look at that one. Genesis 39, verse 1. Notice we're talking about here, brought him of the Ishmaelites. Okay? Then if you look at the 1611, oh wait, there's an insertion here of hand. No, wait a minute. Something's off here. I gotta look at this one again. But look at the 16. What's that?
On
Amy?
the next page, it says hands instead of hand.
So here's hand of the Ishmaelites.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking one of these is about hand, but some of it sometimes it's hard to read. Then if you go to the next page, 1629 Cambridge, brought him at the hands of what? The Ishmaelites. Okay? So, let's look at page 12. Norton concludes his discussion of the 1629 Cambridge edition by offering the following words of caution. The coincidences with annotations that the first edition did not follow are subject to the same argument we have made regarding Bod 1602. The translators may have had further thoughts, which the first edition incorporates. So we cannot be certain that the 1629 editors are following their initial intentions, even though this seems likely in some cases. So is Norton kind of admitting that you can't always know the intentions of why they're making these choices? Okay? So let's look at my conclusion and we'll have time for a couple questions. This is clearly a complicated topic. It is easy to see why many King James advocates have sought ankle-deep explanations instead of plunging the depths of the topic. Okay? The reality is much messier and more complicated than popular treatments of the topic have led many to believe. The book, The Myth of Verbatim Identicality, has sought to provide a scriptural solution to these difficulties. If you are going to be so insistent that everything has to be exactly pristine, you've got issues with that kind of argumentation, right? And you can't say that all of the changes that are made are all printer's errors. That is wishful thinking. All right? Now, we are going to be wrapping this up now for the summertime. We are still going to be having the 9 o'clock hour class. It will be taught by other folks, including myself, possibly here and there sprinkled in. Okay? But when we resume class, we have to finish looking at the 1638 and a few of these other editions. Okay? Somebody's going to say, well, how long are you going to go with this? I don't know. I don't know.
Till the rapture.
As long as it theoretically takes. Now, I will say this. If you guys look at me right now and you say, we're bored, we don't want to do this anymore, we cry uncle, let the suffering end, please. I will let the suffering end and leave things where they are now, even though there's stuff that I think still needs to be done. So, here's your opportunity. Do you not want to do this anymore, or are we still good with this study?
I think we're still good with it.
I know you're still good with it. I hope. What about the rest of you? Miriam's bored. I could tell.
No, I think it's important to study this, but I would probably prefer another topic.
A what?
Prefer another topic.
Okay.
This is my personal.
Well, thanks for being honest. You have lots of new topics this summer. I know at some point this has to end. I get it. I really do. For my own sanity, this has to end at some point. But I feel like if I stop now, I'm leaving certain things undone that need to be covered. So appreciate the honest feedback. Next Sunday, we will have class of some kind. I'm not sure exactly yet who's going to teach it, but we will definitely have class. So, thanks for your attention. Thanks for the feedback, and we'll see you guys next week.